Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the dust-choked heart of ancient Rome, where 50,000 voices rise in a single animal roar and the air smells of blood, wine and hot stone. You're standing on the warm sand of the arena floor, heart hammering, because let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last 30 seconds once those trapdoors open. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting off with me across the planet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You can't understand the Colosseum if you start with pretty drawings or tidy engineering textbooks. No. You start in the year 64 CE, when Rome wakes up to find half the city on fire and one man humming happily while it burns. Nero, the original poster child for imperial midlife crises, looks at the smoking ruins and thinks, you know what this town really needs? A private lake, not a pond, not a fancy fountain, a full-on artificial lake, complete with pleasure boats surrounded by a palace so ridiculously huge it has its own postcode. He calls it the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, and to make room he simply bulldozes entire neighbourhoods, displaces thousands, and tells the surviving Romans it's all for art. The lake itself is the size of several football fields, ringed by colonnades, scented gardens, and statues of Nero looking noble, which is hilarious because the man couldn't look noble if you paid him in solid gold fast forward 6 years. Nero is dead, very much against his will, and Rome has cycled through 3 emperors in 12 months like it's speed dating disaster. Enter Titus Flavius Vespasianus, a grizzled general with the face of a disappointed bulldog and zero patience for nonsense. Vespasian has spent his career fighting in Britain, crushing revolts in Judea, and generally being the adult in the room while Rome parties itself into bankruptcy. He looks at Nero's giant vanity lake sitting in the middle of the capital like a glittering insult and decides that's going in the bin. But Vespasian is clever. He doesn't just drain the lake and plant olive trees. He does something so perfectly, deliciously Roman, it still makes historians giggle. He fills the lake in, levels the ground and builds the biggest, loudest, most in-your-face amphitheatre the world has ever seen. Right on top of Nero's swimming pool, 50,000 seats, 80 entrances, a giant oval of travertine and concrete that basically screams, remember that spoiled brat who thought he was a god? Yeah, we literally paved over his backyard. It's the ancient equivalent of deleting your ex's nudes and replacing them with a 30-foot selfie of yourself flexing. Scholars still argue whether Vespasian actually hated Nero that much, or just needed a popularity boost. Either way, the message lands like a sledgehammer. Construction starts in 70 or 72 CE, depending on which inscription you trust, and the sheer pettiness of the location choice is chef's kiss perfect. Every Roman who walks past the building site knows exactly what's happening. This isn't just a new entertainment venue, it's a public exorcism. Nero's ghost is being buried under hundreds of thousands of tons of stone while the city cheers. And cheer they do because Vespasian promises something Nero never bothered with. Free games, free bread, free vengeance. The people who lost homes to the Golden House now get front row seats to watch criminals get eaten by lions on the exact spot where Nero once floated around sipping chilled wine. There's a poetic justice so thick you could spread it on bread. The scale alone is absurd. Historians estimate that just clearing and stabilising the site requires moving enough earth to fill a small mountain. The lake bed is soggy, unstable, and smells faintly of dead emperor dreams. Modern engineers would spend 3 years writing environmental reports and arguing about groundwater. The Romans. They look at the swampy mess, shrug and say, drain it, pack it, start stacking rocks. And they do. They divert aqueducts, dig drainage tunnels, lay down massive concrete foundations, and somehow finish the whole thing in about 10 years 10. Modern stadiums take longer to choose the seat colour. When it finally opens in 80 CE under Vespasian's son Titus, the inaugural games last 100 days 100. They flood the arena for mock sea battles, release thousands of animals, execute hundreds of prisoners, and generally throw the kind of party that makes Coachella look like a church picnic. The Colosseum isn't dedicated to gods or abstract ideals. Is dedicated to the Roman people, which is code for please like the new management. And it works. Vespasian dies before seeing it finished, but his legacy is set in stone, literally. The Flavians have turned Nero's worst excess into Rome's greatest gift. You have to picture the psychological impact. Every time a Roman citizen walks through those towering arches, they're walking over Nero's grave. Every roar of the crowd is another nail in his memory's coffin. It's revenge architecture, spite made monumental. And the craziest part? It's so good at being a stadium that we still copy the design 2,000 years later. The Colosseum isn't just a building. It's the ultimate Roman mic drop, built on the ruins of one man's ego by another man who understood that sometimes the best way to heal a traumatized city is to give it a giant murder theatre and season tickets. You're standing knee-deep in what used to be Nero's private swimming pool. Only now it's a muddy, stinking crater that smells like wet dog and broken dreams. The year is 71 CE. The sun is already brutal, and somewhere in the distance a foreman is yelling at a team of half-naked labourers to move faster because the emperor wants his giant middle finger monument yesterday. This is the moment the Colosseum stops being a political meme and starts becoming the most insane construction site the ancient world has ever seen. Draining the lake is step one, and it's not as simple as pulling a giant plug. Nero's engineers were good at making pretty water features, terrible at thinking about what happens when someone else wants solid ground. The whole basin is fed by natural springs and aqueduct overflow, so the moment the Romans breach the retaining walls, water starts fighting back. You watch crews in leather tunics wading chest deep, digging diversion channels that snake off toward the Tiber like frantic earthworms. They line the channels with clay pipes and wooden sluices, because Roman project managers have already invented deadlines and overtime pay, except the pay is mostly not dying. While one army of workers wrestles the water, another is busy turning the lake bed into something that won't swallow the finished building like quicksand. The ground here is a geological layer cake of silt, clay, and whatever garbage Romans threw into ponds for 60 years. Modern soil reports would scream red flags and demand piling so deep you'd hit dinosaur bones. The Romans glance at the mud spit and say, "We'll just pack it until it stops moving," and that's exactly what they do. They dump in layer after layer of broken bricks, pottery shards, gravel, and compacted earth until the whole site rises like a very aggressive souffle. Historians still argue whether they used some lost drainage trick or simply trusted the gods and brute force. Either way, 2,000 years later, the thing is still sitting there. So who's laughing now? Then comes the foundation itself, and this is where you realise Romans treated physics like a personal challenge. They pour a massive elliptical ring of concrete 12 metres deep and 8 metres wide, so thick you could drive a modern tank battalion across it without leaving a scratch. The concrete is the early version of their magical pozzolana mix. More on that later, but even at this stage it's already ridiculous. They sink wooden caissons into the muck, pump out the water with chain bucket systems worked by prisoners walking in giant hamster wheels, and pour the concrete directly against the earth. No steel rebar, no vibration tools, just men with buckets and the calm confidence of people who once told the Mediterranean, "Stay on your side of the harbour," and built a port that shut it up. You trudge along the freshly levelled surface, boots squelching in the last puddles, and overhead the travertine blocks are already arriving. They come from quarries 30 kilometres away at Tibur, today's Tivoli, cut into slabs weighing 6 tons each, dragged on sledges lubricated with olive oil and the tears of oxen. The logistics alone would give a modern project manager nightmares. 20,000 blocks for the outer wall alone, all numbered, all needing to arrive in the right order, because there's no Home Depot returns desk in 72 CEs. Yet somehow the stones keep coming day after day, hauled up temporary earthen ramps that disappear as fast as they rise. The workforce is a small city of its own. Estimates say up to 100,000 people cycle through the site over the decade. Quarrymen, haulers, carpenters, masons, and tens of thousands of enslaved labourers captured in Vespasian's recent Judean campaign. They live in wooden barracks that sprawl across the nearby hills, eat barley porridge and whatever didn't sell at market, and work from sunrise to sunset because the emperor promised the Roman people a distraction, and emperors hate breaking promises that involve lions. You pause at the edge of the growing foundation ring and watch surveyors using a tool called the gromer, basically a cross with plumb bobs, to make sure the ellipse is perfect, 1 degree off, and the whole thing will look drunk. They get it within centimetres, in an age before lasers. The head surveyor probably celebrates by drinking unwatered wine and telling everyone within earshot that Greek mathematicians can take their fancy theorems and sit on them. By 74 CE, the site is finally dry, packed, and ready. You stand where the Emperor's box will eventually be, looking out over an oval crater that already feels enormous, and realise something chilling. This isn't just a building site, it's a statement being poured in concrete and sweat. Every shovelful of dirt, every travertine block sliding into place is Rome telling itself, we survived Nero, we survived Civil War, and now we're going to build something so big, so permanent, that no future lunatic can ever erase us again. The lake is gone. The humiliation is buried, and on its grave, the most absurdly over-engineered party venue in history is rising faster than anyone thought possible. You're crouched in the half-light of a Roman concrete yard just outside the city walls, and the air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, lime dust, and something faintly oceanic that makes your nose itch. A grizzled foreman is shouting at a line of barefoot workers to keep stirring the pit, because if the mix cools even slightly, the whole batch turns into expensive gravel. This right here is the real secret source of the Colosseum. Roman concrete, the stuff that laughs at earthquakes, floods, and 2,000 years of tourists carving Marcus Silvia forever into everything. Modern cement hardens and then just sits there, slowly cracking whenever a truck drives past. Roman concrete, on the other hand, is basically a vampire. It gets stronger the longer it lives, amois. Scientists today poke at samples with million-dollar microscopes and whisper, "How are you still getting harder, you beautiful ancient freak?" The answer is hiding in a volcano near Naples called Pozzuoli, where the Romans mined a magical grey dust called pozzolana. Mix that volcanic ash with lime, add some chunky aggregate, throw in seawater for seasoning, and you've got a brew that doesn't just set. It keeps chemically evolving for centuries. The seawater introduces reactive alumina that forms rare crystals, aluminous tobermorate and philipsite if you want to sound smart at parties, which weave themselves tighter every time that the concrete gets wet. It's like the material looked at time and said, "Hold my wine." You watch a crew pour the foundation ring we talked about last time, and it's hypnotic. They build wooden forms the size of small houses, then lower in baskets of broken bricks and rubble for filler. Next come the buckets of sludgy grey soup slopped in by men who move like they're dancing with the devil's porridge. No pumps, no vibrateurs, just rhythmic tamping with long poles until the surface glistens like wet moon rock. The foreman tastes a fingertip of the mix, yes, tastes it, and nods. That's quality control 1st century style. The quirky little secret nobody writes on tourist plaques. They sometimes tossed in animal blood, not for drama. The proteins apparently helped aeration and made the concrete slightly more workable. Historians still argue whether it was deliberate chemistry or just Grandpa said blood makes everything better past the goat. Either way, the Colosseum is technically held together by volcanic ash, seawater and a dash of ancient gore. Try putting that on the brochure. Out at the building site, you see the concrete used in ways that would give modern inspectors a stroke. The outer walls are faced with beautiful travertine, sure, but behind that pretty limestone skin is a skeleton of concrete and rubble, so thick you could park a fleet of chariots inside the walls and nobody would notice. The Romans pour concrete into every awkward gap, every vault, every awkward curve that brick or cut stone would struggle with arches. Concrete lets them span distances that make Greek architects clutch their scrolls and weep. Vaulted corridors that run for miles under the seating. Concrete. The entire upper attic level where the sailors will one day wrestle the giant awning. Mostly concrete so light and strong that it feels like cheating. You wander through a half-finished corridor and run your hand along a wall that was poured in 78C and still feels smoother than some modern sidewalks. The surface has that gentle, almost soft texture of perfectly cured Roman opus cementitium, and when you tap it, it rings solidus, like the building is humming to itself. 2,000 years of earthquakes, fires, and medieval popes treating the place like a quarry, and the concrete core just shrugs. Modern replicas using the exact ancient recipe have been sitting in seawater for decades now, getting stronger every year, while our Portland cement crumbles like stale biscuits. The Colosseum isn't standing because it's lucky. It's standing because the Romans accidentally invented a building material that treats entropy like a personal insult. By the time Titus throws the opening games in 80 CE, the concrete has already begun its slow, patient conquest of time. While emperors rise and fall, while the empire itself cracks apart, the concrete keeps knitting itself tighter, crystal by crystal, century by century. You stand in the shade of an arch that was poured before your country even existed, and you can almost hear the material whispering, "We'll still be here when your skyscrapers are dust-sweet dreams." You're perched on a wooden scaffold 50 metres above the Roman ground, wind whipping through the half-built arches, and every hair on your arm stands up because you're staring at the skeleton of a building that has decided gravity is optional. The Colosseum isn't held up by walls the way normal structures are. It's held together by a three-dimensional web of arches, stacked on arches, like the Romans looked at a beehive and thought, "Yeah, but make it smug." Each arch is a perfect semicircle of travertine voussoirs, those wedge-shaped blocks, locked together so tightly you can't slip a bronze coin between them. No mortar in the fancy outer ring, just precision cutting and the quiet confidence of men who measured twice and conquered once. You lean out and count. 80 arches on the ground floor alone, 80 more above them, 80 more above those, and then a fourth story with Corinthian plasters pretending they're structural, when really they're just there to flex. That's over 300 exterior arches in total, each one carrying the weight of the next like a chain of stone gymnasts who never get tired. The genius isn't that the arches look pretty, though they do in that over-the-top Roman way that screams, "We have too much marble and not enough chill." The genius is what happens when an earthquake rolls through. While rigid Greek temples crack like dropped plates, the Colosseum's arches turn the shockwave into a gentle game of pass the parcel. Stress hits one arch, it shoves the load sideways to its neighbour, the neighbour passes it along, and by the time the tremor reaches the end of the row, everyone has shared the burden and nobody has collapsed. It's the architectural equivalent of a group project where, miraculously, nobody slacks off. You climb higher, boots creaking on temporary planks, and peer into the radial walls that shoot inward like spokes on a wheel. These walls are the real spine, thick barrels of concrete-filled brick that tie the whole ellipse together and stop it from flattening into a very expensive pancake. Between them run the vaulted corridors you'll soon sprint through when the lions get loose. Every vault is another arch turned sideways, barreling through space and laughing at the idea that stone should fall down. Historians still argue whether the Romans fully understood the physics of thrust lines and lateral distribution, or if they just built 1,000 amphitheatres and noticed the archy ones stayed standing. Either way, the result is a building that can sway like a drunk philosopher and still be ready for work the next morning. When the massive 847 CE earthquake hits Rome, entire districts collapse, aqueducts topple, and the Colosseum just loses a few outer blocks on the south side, yawns, and keeps going. Modern engineers run simulations and end up staring at their screens, muttering, "It shouldn't be this good at not dying." The quirky detail nobody mentions on the audio guides. Some of the arches were originally fitted with bronze letters spelling out dedicatory inscriptions, and medieval scavengers pried them out so violently that you can still see the ghost shadows on the stone. The letters are long gone, melted into bells or cannons, but the empty dovetail slots remain like missing teeth in a 2,000-year-old smile. You drop down to ground level again and walk the outer perimeter at dusk. The setting sun turns every arch into a glowing frame, one inside the other, deeper and deeper, until the far side disappears into cool blue shadow. It feels less like architecture and more like standing inside the ribcage of some sleeping titan who decided to take a nap in 80 CE and simply hasn't woken up yet. The arches don't just carry weight, they carry time. Every curve is a promise that Rome can bend but will never break. And 2 millennia later, the promise still hasn't expired. You're crammed shoulder to shoulder with 50,000 Romans who have all decided that personal space is a myth invented by cowards. The trumpet has just sounded the end of the morning executions, the crowd is buzzing on cheap wine and bloodlust, and suddenly everyone decides it's time to leave at once. In a modern stadium, this would be the moment panic sets in. Phones come out and Twitter fills with videos of people trapped for 45 minutes in the Colosseum. You blink, the stampede starts, and 7 minutes later, the place is empty except for a few lost sandals and a confused pigeon. Welcome to the Vomitoria, the ancient world's brutally efficient answer to crowd flow, and yes, the name means exactly what you think it does. 80 arched doorways ring the building like hungry mouths, each one numbered, with big Roman numerals so even the drunkest spectator can find his gate. You're swept into one of these tunnels, 15 feet wide, 20 feet tall, vaulted ceiling, echoing with thousands of hobnailed sandals, and the current is unstoppable. The floor slopes gently upward in a perfect ramp because Romans understood that drunk people plus stairs equals comedy lawsuits. You don't walk so much as surf on a wave of sweaty togas, carried forward by the sheer momentum of 50,000 bodies that all want lunch at the same exact thermopolium. The genius is in the geometry. Every corridor is angled so that each vomitorium feeds a separate slice of the seating pie. No crisscrossing, no bottlenecks, no "excuse me, are you in XXL or XM?" You spill out into the Roman sunshine exactly where your ticket stub told you to, blinking like you've been birthed by a stone octopus. Modern stadium designers run computer simulations of the Colosseum's flow and end up crying into their energy drinks because even with AI pathfinding and fire codes, we still can't beat a bunch of guys who thought vomit was a perfectly reasonable verb for crowd dispersal. Historians still argue whether the 5 to 10 minute full evacuation claim is ancient exaggeration or cold hard fact. Either way, when the sources say the place could empty faster than a modern NFL stadium with half the capacity, you believe them. The quirky fringe detail. Some of the staircases were deliberately narrow for the upper tiers because the cheap seats were for women, slaves and foreigners. Narrow stairs meant the elites down below got to leave first without rubbing elbows with the unwashed. Class warfare engineered right into the concrete. You're funneled up one of those staircases now, thighs burning, because the poor seats are basically the nosebleed section on Mount Olympus. The steps are worn into smooth scoops by 2,000 years of feet, and every landing opens onto a concentric corridor that rings the entire building like a layered cake of human traffic. Senators glide down private staircases straight to their cushioned thrones near the arena sand, smelling the blood and feeling very superior. You, meanwhile, climb until the air gets thinner and the gladiators look like action figures fighting ants. The whole system is a masterpiece of passive crowd control, no security yelling. Keep moving, no turnstiles beeping angrily, just pure architectural psychology. Wide entrances suck people in like a vacuum, radial walls channel them without thinking, and gentle slopes keep the momentum going until you're spat out onto the street wondering, what just happened? The Romans didn't invent the stadium. They weaponized human herd behaviour and wrapped it in travertine. By the time you stumble out into the Roman afternoon, the roar inside has already faded to a distant hum. You look back at the Colosseum towering above the city, 80 arches yawning open like it just burped up an entire civilization, and you realise something quietly terrifying. Rome didn't just build a venue, it built a machine for swallowing and regurgitating 50,000 people whenever it felt hungry. And it still works so well that every time a modern stadium brags about its state-of-the-art egress, somewhere an ancient Roman engineer rolls in his grave and mutters, "Amateurs, you're under the arena floor now, and the world above has vanished." The sun is a memory, replaced by flickering oil lamps that throw long, twitching shadows across damp brick walls. The air is thick with the smell of wet straw, terrified animals, and human sweat that never quite dries. Welcome to the Hypogeum, the Colosseum's secret underworld, a 2-story labyrinth of tunnels, cages, ramps and winches where Rome's most insane theatre magic was born. Up there they cheer for glory. Down here you're just trying not to get eaten before lunch. The wooden floor overhead is a grid of trapdoors, 80 or more depending on the century, each one hiding a vertical shaft that drops straight into this gloom. You step carefully because the ground is slick with animal blood and olive oil from broken lamps, and somewhere in the dark a lion is pacing hard enough to rattle its cage bars like a drum solo from Hades. The Hypogeum stretches the full 87 by 55 metre footprint of the arena, a hidden city of brick corridors narrow enough that 2 men can't pass without turning sideways. Every wall is scarred with claw marks and graffiti from bored stagehands, crude drawings of gladiators, tally marks for successful lifts, and the occasional "I hate this job" scratched in Latin. This is where the day's programme is assembled like a nightmare jigsaw puzzle. One corridor holds 20 Libyan lions sedated just enough to keep them from eating the stagehands. Another has a pair of rhinoceroses that nobody quite knows how to handle. Spoiler, they never quite figured it out. Bears, boars, wolves, ostriches, even a very confused giraffe once, all waiting in wooden cages barely big enough to turn around in. The noise is constant, low growls, the creak of ropes under tension, men whispering prayers to gods who clearly have a twisted sense of humour. You follow a narrow passage to the central spine, where the real wizardry happens. 32 wooden elevators, some sources say 80, but 32 is the safe archaeological count, sit in their shafts like sleeping beasts. Each one is a platform roughly the size of a modern car, suspended by a web of hemp ropes thicker than your wrist. Those ropes run up through bronze pulleys, across the ceiling and down to massive capstans turned by teams of 8 to 12 slaves walking in circles for hours. One slip, one frayed strand, and the whole cage drops 30 feet onto whatever poor soul is standing underneath. Health and safety meetings down here consist of someone yelling, "Don't die," and everyone nodding like that's helpful. The quirky detail that still makes scholars giggle. They found little clay oil lamps, shaped like gladiator helmets used by the Hypogeum crews, tiny souvenirs to remind you that if the lion doesn't get you, the overtime will. Historians still argue whether the entire system was built from day one or added later under Domitian. Either way, by the early 2nd century the underground is fully operational and absolutely unhinged. You crouch beside one of the capstans and watch a rehearsal. 8 men lean into the spokes, muscles gleaming with sweat, and the platform above groans upward. Somewhere overhead a trapdoor is chained shut until showtime. When it opens, sunlight will flood down like the wrath of Sol Invictus himself. And whatever is on that platform, beast, gladiator, or scenic forest, will rise into the roar of 50,000 people who paid nothing for the ticket and demand everything in return. The coordination required is insane. Every lift timed to the heartbeat of the games, every animal coaxed or prodded onto the right platform, every slave knowing exactly when to brace for the recoil. As the counterweights swing, the Hypogeum isn't just storage, it's a factory of spectacle. Carpenters hammer together fake trees that will pop up to create an instant forest. Painters touch up backdrops of mythical landscapes. Armourers oil swords that will be used once and then tossed into a corner slick with blood. And through it all moves the smell, straw, urine, terror, incense. Someone lit to cover the terror, until the whole underworld feels like the stomach of some vast creature digesting Rome's darkest fantasies. You press your ear to the wooden floor above and hear the muffled thunder of the crowd arriving for the morning show. Down here, the crew's tents, ropes tighten. Animals snarl. Someone mutters a final prayer to Hercules, patron of anyone stupid enough to work 30 feet under a hungry lion. The Hypogeum holds its breath, waiting for the first trumpet that will turn controlled chaos into controlled catastrophe. And when that trumpet finally sounds, 80 trapdoors will open like the jaws of the earth itself, and the underworld will vomit its horrors straight into the sunlight. You're flat on your back in the blackest dark you've ever known, staring up at a wooden platform barely an arm's length above your face. The air is furnace hot, thick with lion breath and the sour reek of fear sweat from the 12 slaves wedged around you. A single oil lamp swings from a nail, throwing just enough light to show the counterweight ropes trembling like harp strings. Somewhere above, 50,000 Romans are stamping their feet in perfect rhythm, making the whole arena floor throb like a giant drum. And right now, on the platform directly over your head, a full-grown Numidian lion is deciding whether to roar or to pounce on the cage bars that are the only thing keeping it from turning you into lunch. This is the moment the Colosseum stops being architecture and becomes pure, unfiltered theatre magic. Welcome to the world's first surprise tiger elevator. The lift system is gloriously, dangerously over-engineered. Each shaft is lined with smooth brick so the platform can't snag. At the top, bronze pulleys the size of chariot wheels sit in stone sockets worn shiny from centuries of use. Down here, the ropes, 8 of them per elevator, each as thick as a man's forearm, run through a series of counterweights, big clay jars filled with sand or stones that drop when the slaves pull, giving the whole thing just enough mechanical advantage to lift a cage, a tree, or a very angry gladiator without turning the crew into human spaghetti. You can feel the counterweight jars hanging behind the wall, swaying gently every time someone shifts their weight. One snapped rope, and those jars become wrecking balls. Everyone knows it, nobody talks about it. A foreman hisses the count, quiet because the crowd above can sometimes hear you if you shout, "Uno, duo, tres." The slaves lean into the capstan spokes. You feel the platform above you lurch, then rise an inch. The lion decides this is an excellent time to roar, and the sound punches straight through your chest. The ropes creak like old ship rigging. Another inch, another. the lamp flame flattens from the updraft. 10 feet to go until the platform kisses the underside of the arena floor, where a ring of iron pins holds the trapdoor shut. When those pins are yanked, sunlight will slam down the shaft like a physical thing. Breathing. The trapdoor will flip open, and whatever is on the platform will shoot upward into the roar. The quirky detail that still makes archaeologists laugh. They found little wooden tokens in the hypogeum, each carved with an animal symbol: lion, bear, bull, and a number. These were the Q tokens. A runner would sprint from the editor's box with the next token, hand it to the liftmaster, and that told the crew exactly which shaft to fire next. It's the ancient Roman version of a stage manager holding a clipboard and yelling, "Places!" except the actors want to eat you. Historians still argue whether the elevators were powered purely by human muscle, or if they used some lost counterweight trick that let 4 men lift a rhino. The grooves in the brickwork suggest the latter, but the sources are annoyingly vague. Either way, the system worked so smoothly that during a single day's games they could fire off dozens of lifts without a single fatal hitch, at least not on purpose. You're on the big central lift now, the one reserved for the star attractions. Today it's carrying an entire scenic set, 4 live trees in wooden tubs, a fake rock painted to look like a desert outcrop, and a condemned prisoner dressed as Orpheus, who's been told that if he sings beautifully enough the animals might spare him. Spoiler, they never do. The platform groans under the weight. The Orpheus guy is trembling so hard his lyre is buzzing by itself. The liftmaster gives the nod. Slaves throw their backs into the capstan ropes, sing. Counterweights drop, and suddenly you're rising, faster than seems safe, the darkness peeling away above you in strips of torchlight 10 feet. 5. The trapdoor pins clatter as runners yank them free. A blade of white sunlight stabs down the shaft, blinding after the gloom. The lion on the neighbouring lift chooses this exact second to let out a bellow that rattles your teeth. Then the platform kisses the trapdoor, the final latch flips, and the whole world explodes upward in a roar of heat, sand, and 50,000 voices screaming at once. The trees rock. Orpheus stumbles into the sunlight and starts singing for his life in a voice that cracks like a 12-year-old's. The crowd goes feral, and somewhere below, in the sudden quiet of the empty shaft, a dozen exhausted slaves collapse against the capstan and try to remember what daylight looks like. That's the Colosseum's dirtiest secret. Every single moment of high drama you see from the stands is rehearsed, timed, and executed by a small army of nameless men working in hellish darkness so the audience can gasp, "How did they do that?" The elevators aren't just machinery, they're the heartbeat of Roman spectacle, pumping surprise, terror, awe, and wonder straight up from the underworld into the Roman sun, one perfectly timed catastrophe at a time. You're standing on the warm wooden planks of the arena floor at dawn, barefoot because the sand hasn't been raked yet, and the only sound is the soft slap of water against the inner walls. Overnight, while Rome slept off its hangover, an army of workers has turned the Colosseum into a lake. Not a puddle, not a decorative moat, an actual honest-to-Neptune inland sea, deep enough for 12-foot warships to float bow to bow under the shadow of the Emperor's box. The morning light turns the water gold and pink, and you can smell the faint salt tang carried up from Ostia, because yes, they used real seawater piped in through underground conduits. This is a Nomachia, Rome's pop-up navy, and the city has lost its entire mind over it. The idea is simple on papyrus and completely deranged in practice. Stage full-scale naval battles inside a landlocked amphitheatre. Condemned prisoners, captured pirates, or just unlucky volunteers are handed oars, shields, and a prayer, then packed into flat-bottomed galleys painted in garish reds and blues. The ships, some sources say up to 50 at a time, glide out from hidden slips beneath the seating, and the moment the trumpet blasts, the Colosseum turns into a churning cauldron of splintering oars, screaming men, and arrows hissing into the water like angry hornets. You wade to the edge and peer down a service hatch. Below the arena floor, the hypogeum's normal chaos of cages and elevators has been drowned. The lower corridors are flooded to chest height, and slaves in loincloths are frantically bailing with leather buckets because the wooden machinery doesn't love being underwater. The water itself arrived through a branch of the Aqua Claudia aqueduct, rerouted overnight via massive bronze valves that still survive in fragments. Historians still argue whether the full-depth flooding happened only under Titus and Domitian, or if later emperors kept the plumbing. The archaeology says yes for the first century, then the system got clogged with sand and good intentions. The quirky detail nobody puts on the postcards? They scented the water. Yes, really. Marshall mentions rose petals and saffron sprinkled across the surface so the Colosseum smelled like a perfume shop instead of a wet dog. Imagine 50,000 Romans inhaling floral naval warfare while prisoners ram each other into splinters for sport. You climb to the podium level just as the first ships clear the tunnels. The crowd is already drunk on anticipation and actual wine. The emperor, Titus today, raises his hand, the signal drops, and suddenly the lake erupts. Bronze rams crunch into hulls. Oars snap like dry spaghetti. Men leap overboard only to discover the water is barely 5 feet deep in places, so they're left splashing and cursing while arrows rain down from archers perched on the mast platforms. The noise is unreal. Wood screaming, water slapping, 50,000 voices rising in a single animal howl that bounces off the velarium and comes back louder. At one point a ship actually sinks, not planned, but the crowd loves it. The prisoners flail toward the edge while the audience debates whether to cheer or throw bread. A clever stagehand below yanks a chain, a hidden drainage grate opens, and the entire lake begins to drop. Within an hour the water level has fallen enough for the afternoon beast hunt to begin on the newly revealed sand, still glistening and streaked with blood like a crime scene that just got power washed. By dusk the arena is dry again. The ships have vanished back into their underground slips, and the only evidence of the morning's madness is a faint tide line on the lower walls and the lingering scent of saffron and brine. The Colosseum has swallowed an ocean and spat it out before dinner, because Rome looked at the concept of restraint and decided it was for other empires. You're crouched in the Hypogeum again, but the cages are empty tonight and the air smells of fresh paint and pine resin instead of lion. A dozen carpenters are hammering together an entire forest in the dark, and you're trying not to trip over fake boulders the size of oxen. Tomorrow morning the arena floor will be a flat, innocent stretch of sand. By noon it will sprout trees, rocks, and a miniature hill complete with real grass and a painted backdrop of distant mountains. Rome didn't just want blood. Rome wanted immersive theatre centuries before anyone coined the term the scenery lifts. Used the same elevator shafts we met earlier, only now the platforms are loaded with wooden frames wrapped in painted linen, real tree trunks shipped in from the Apennines, and pots of live shrubs that somehow survive the ride upward. You watch a crew wrestle a 6-metre pine into place, roots wrapped in burlap soaked with Nile water. Because the props department has standards, the whole contraption is lashed to a platform with counterweights so perfectly balanced that 8 men can hoist an entire grove into daylight without breaking a sweat. Well, without breaking extra sweat. When the cue comes, the trapdoors flip open in perfect sequence. First the hill rises in the centre, then clusters of trees pop up around it like nature's jack-in-the-box. Painted canvas backdrops unroll from slots in the podium wall, turning bare stone into a misty woodland. The condemned prisoners, today's mythological cast, are lifted last, dressed as satyrs or nymphs, clutching real vines and looking like they're regretting every life choice that led to this moment. The crowd above loses its mind. One second it's a desert of sand, the next it's a sacred grove where Hercules is about to wrestle a very real and very annoyed stag. The quirky detail that still delights scholars? Some of the fake rocks were hollow and doubled as hiding spots for archers who would pop out mid-scene to hunt the actors. Health and safety was more of a suggestion than a department. Historians still argue whether the most elaborate scenery belonged to Domitian's reign, or if Titus already had full pop-up forests. The written sources brag about sudden woods from the very first games, so somebody figured it out fast. The logistics were insane. Soil had to be damp enough for plants to look alive, but not so wet it turned to mud when 50,000 people, stamped in excitement, watering cans were passed hand to hand in the Hypogeum like sacred relics. You're on one of the smaller lifts now, sharing the platform with a painted cardboard temple and a very nervous actor playing Prometheus. The chains tighten. The counterweights drop, and suddenly you're rising through a shaft that smells of earth and resin, the darkness peeling away until blinding sunlight floods in, and the temple roof clears the arena floor with a soft thud. The crowd roars as the rock beside you splits open, and an archer in leopard skin leaps out to shoot Prometheus in the liver on schedule. The actor screams theatrically. The eagle, real, trained and deeply unimpressed, swoops in on a wire, and 50,000 Romans decide this is the best Tuesday they've ever had. By the end of the day, the forest is gone, yanked back underground in pieces, the sand raked smooth again, ready for tomorrow's desert or ocean, or whatever new madness the program demands. The Colosseum doesn't just change scenes, it devours entire landscapes and spits out new ones before the wine has time to warm. And every tree, every rock, every painted sky is just another reminder that when Rome wanted spectacle, it didn't do half measures. It built a machine that could rewrite reality between lunch and the afternoon executions. You're up in the attic now, the very top ring of the Colosseum, where the air is thin and the sun beats down like an angry god. All around the rim, 240 wooden masts rise like ship rigging, each one crowned with a bronze corbel, shaped like a snarling gargoyle head. Thick hemp ropes run through those heads, crisscrossing the sky in a giant spiderweb that glitters with iron rings and pulleys. And manning those ropes, actual sailors from the Roman Navy, barefoot, sunburnt, and muttering sea shanties while 50,000 civilians scream for shade below. This is the Valerium, the world's largest retractable sunroof, operated by the only people crazy enough to treat a stone ellipse like a trireme at sea. The Valerium isn't one giant sheet. It's hundreds of wedge-shaped canvas panels, bright red and blue striped, because Rome never met a chance to flex that it didn't take, laced together with cords and hoisted into place like sails on a war fleet. Each panel is controlled by a separate team of sailors perched on narrow wooden platforms that jut out from the attic wall like swallow nests. When the emperor gives the nod, or when the crowd starts fainting in theatrical unison, the commander on the roof barks orders through a bronze-speaking trumpet, and the whole navy snaps into motion. You're clinging to one of those platforms now, wind whipping your tunic, watching a dozen sailors haul on ropes thick as your wrist. The canvas billows upward, catching the breeze like a pregnant cloud, then settles into place with a soft thunderclap that echoes across the entire arena. Within minutes, the sky disappears behind a rippling ceiling of colour and cool shadow slides across the stands like mercy from the gods. The temperature drops 10 degrees in seconds. A collective sigh rises from 50,000 throats, followed by a cheer that rattles the masts, the quirky detail nobody expects. The Valerium wasn't perfectly watertight. On hot days, they'd sprinkle saffron water through tiny nozzles in the attic so a fine golden mist drifted down onto the crowd below. Rome invented scented air conditioning before it invented basic plumbing for the poor. Historians still argue whether the full Valerium covered the entire oval or just two-thirds. The archaeology leans toward two-thirds, with the open section over the emperor so he could bask in divine sunlight while everyone else stayed comfortable. Either way, the engineering was insane. Each mast could be tilted and adjusted individually, so sailors could angle the canvas to catch the breeze and funnel cool air downward like a giant stone chimney in reverse. From up here, the view is dizzying. You can see the whole city spread out below, the Forum's white marble gleaming, the Tiber glinting like a lazy snake, smoke curling from 1,000 rooftops. But mostly you see the canvas sea stretching overhead, rippling gently every time the wind shifts. Sailors shout to each other in nautical jargon that would make a landlubber weep. Ease the port brails. Haul the starboard clew lines. Mind your luff or we'll spill the whole bloody thing. It's the Roman navy on permanent detached duty, fighting the sun instead of Carthaginians. When the games end and the crowd starts filing out, the process reverses just as smoothly. Ropes slacken, canvas folds in on itself like a collapsing tent, and within minutes the sky is blue again and the sailors are coiling lines thicker than pythons, already arguing about who gets the first cup of wine at the Papina downstairs. The Valerium doesn't just block the sun, it turns the Colosseum into a living, breathing organism that inhales canvas and exhales comfort on command. You climb down the narrow ladder as the last panel furls away, legs shaking from hours clinging to a wall 90 metres up. The sailors slap your back and offer you a swig of Posca so sour it could strip paint. And as you stumble out into the sudden blaze of afternoon light, you realise Rome didn't just build a stadium. It built a machine that could tame the sky itself, using nothing but cloth, rope, and a few hundred very salty men who probably never imagined their career would peak at giving shade to gladiator fans. You're in the Emperor's box now, the Pulvinar, perched on the north side like a golden balcony floating above the blood. The marble is cool under your palms even in high summer, because everything here is designed to remind you that one man sits closer to the gods than the other, 50,000 mortals stacked around him. The seat itself is a throne on steroids, purple cushions stuffed with swan's down, ivory armrests carved with victories nobody else was allowed to claim, and a private staircase that lets the Emperor arrive fashionably late without rubbing shoulders with the plebs. But the real flex isn't the furniture, it's the view. From here, Titus, or Trajan, or Commodus, depending on the century, looks straight down the long axis of the arena, perfectly framed by the ellipse like he personally ordered the laws of geometry. Every gladiator who raises his sword to salute those about to die is staring directly at this box. Every lion that leaps, every ship that rams, every condemned man who staggers out dressed as Icarus, all of them perform for one pair of eyes first and 50,000 second. The architecture itself is a daily reminder. Rome belongs to him. The quirky detail nobody mentions on the guided tours. There was a private toilet. Yes, really. A discreet door behind the throne leads to a small chamber with a marble seat and a direct drop into the Cloaca Maxima. The most powerful man in the world could watch men disembowel each other while taking a leisurely shit, and the smell was whisked away by the same sewer system that served the slums. Equality. Roman style. You lean over the balustrade and look down. The sand is still wet from this morning's executions. The dark patches haven't quite dried in the heat. Directly below you is a little gate barely wide enough for one man. The Porta Sana Vivaria, the gate of life where winners limp out to cheers, and the Porta Libertinensis opposite, named after the goddess of funerals, where the losers are dragged out by hooks through the heels. The Emperor gets to decide which gate opens. One thumb up or down, one lazy flick of the wrist, and a man walks out a hero, or gets hauled out like butcher's scraps. The power is so absolute it feels obscene. Senators and Vestal Virgins sit in the rows immediately flanking the box, close enough to smell the imperial perfume, usually something expensive involving spikenard and crushed pearls. They're required to clap first, laugh loudest, and never ever look bored. One recorded story claims Caligula once ordered a senator thrown to the beasts mid-show just for yawning. Nobody knows if it's true, but nobody yawned after that. From up here, the crowd becomes a single living thing, a shimmering mosaic of white togas and coloured awnings that ripples every time a gladiator lands a blow. When the velarium is deployed, the light turns the arena floor the colour of watered wine. When the saffron mist drifts down, the Emperor gets the first perfumed breeze. Because of course he does trumpet sound from the four corners of the attic, and every head swivels toward the box, like flowers tracking the sun. The games can't legally start until the Emperor drops the white napkin, the mapper, a gesture so simple it's almost insulting in its casualness. One flick of cloth and the morning's first throat is cut. You sit back on the purple cushion and feel the stone still holding the warmth of 2,000 years of imperial backsides. Somewhere below, a gladiator is oiling his blade and praying to Fortuna. Somewhere above, sailors are wrestling the velarium against a sudden gust, and right here in this one gilded rectangle of marble, the entire savage, glorious, ridiculous machine of the Colosseum balances on the mood of a single man who might be enlightened, drunk, or 14 years old. Rome built the biggest stage in history, then handed one guy the only remote control. You're in the cheap seats now, way up in the Manianum Summum in Linnaeus, the wooden nosebleeds where the air is thin and the view is mostly the back of someone's head. This is where Rome parks its women, its poorest citizens, its slaves and its foreigners, anyone who doesn't rate marble. The benches are rough pine planks that haven't seen varnish since Vespasian's birthday, and by midday Chas has gone numb in a way that feels personal. But nobody complains because from up here the Colosseum does something magical. It shrinks the entire empire into one roaring bowl, and for a few hours even the lowliest street porter gets to feel like he owns the world. The social ladder is literally carved in stone. Down on the podium, senators lounge on cushions and sip snow-chilled wine. 20 rows up, the equestrians get slightly narrower marble benches and pretend they're not jealous. Another 30 rows higher, the ordinary Palati, the dark-clothed regular citizens, squeeze together, on stone that's already hot enough to fry an egg. And then there's you in the wooden rafters, where the only thing separating you from a 90-metre drop is a flimsy railing and the grace of a god who's clearly busy elsewhere, the quirky detail nobody on the ground realizes. Up here you can hear everything. Sound rises. Every wet crunch of blade on bone, every animal scream, every gladiator's dying gurgle bounces off the velarium and comes back louder. The sailors working the awning sometimes lean over the edge and shout down colour commentary in thick Neapolitan accents. "He's got no left guard, the idiot!" The crowd up top laughs, passes watered wine in shared cups, and feels like they're in on the secret. Women were officially allowed only from Domitian's time onward. Before that, they had to watch from a separate colonnade like it was a sin to enjoy violence in mixed company. When the band finally lifts, they flood the upper tiers in bright stolas, hair piled high with bone pins, screaming louder than the men because nobody told them to be dignified. Slaves sit on the steps because there aren't enough benches, and some clever ones bring cushions stolen from their masters' houses. Foreigners cluster by language. Syrians arguing in Aramaic, Gauls drunk on Italian wine and nostalgia, Egyptians quietly betting in Greek. From this height the arena floor looks tiny, a postage stamp of sand where tiny figures dance and die. But the scale does something to your brain. Every drop of blood is visible. Every flash of steel catches the sun like a signal mirror. When a lion takes down a bestiarius, the splash of red is so bright against the yellow sand that half the wooden section stands up as one, a single organism made of 50,000 nobodies suddenly sharing a heartbeat. There are no vomitoria this high up. You climb the same narrow stairs you came in on, single file, drunk and sunburnt and singing obscene songs about the Emperor's girlfriend. The stairs sway slightly, wood on stone, 2,000 years of wear, and every creak is a reminder that you're trusting Roman carpentry with your life. But nobody falls, not today. Today the gods are busy watching the show like everyone else. When the final trumpet sounds and the crowd starts to move, the wooden tiers empty last. You shuffle down endless flights, thighs burning, the roar fading behind you into a low, satisfied growl. And as you bail out into the Roman dusk with the rest of the city's invisible people, you realise the Colosseum's cruelest and kindest trick. For one day it let the forgotten sit higher than the gods, gave them the best echo in the world, and convinced them, just for a moment, that Rome was theirs too. You're standing on the arena floor long after the crowd has gone, when the only light comes from a thin moon sliding between the arches, and the only sound is the drip of something wet hitting sand. The place is never truly empty. Night belongs to the clean-up crews, the night watch, and the ghosts who never quite figured out which gate was theirs. Slaves move in silent teams with rakes and shovels, smoothing the day's chaos back into perfect golden sand. They work by torchlight, faces wrapped in cloth against the smell. What can't be raked away is shoveled into wheeled carts, broken swords, splintered shields, torn nets, the occasional finger. Everything gets sorted. Bronze goes to the armoury, wood to the furnaces, flesh to the tie-up barges that slip away before dawn. Rome recycles its horrors the way other cities recycle pottery shards. You follow one of the carts through the Porta Libitinensis, the Gate of Libitina, goddess of funerals, and into a narrow service corridor lit by a single sputtering lamp. Here the walls are blackened with centuries of torch smoke and scratched with names. Gladiators carving their own epitaphs the night before a fight. Slaves counting days until manumission. One lonely Greek poet who wrote, "I hated every second of this," in perfect iambic trimeter. The air is cooler, thick with the copper reek that never quite leaves your tongue. At the end of the corridor is the spoliarium, the stripping room. Bodies are laid out on stone slabs like fish on a market stall. Armourers strip the dead gladiators of anything valuable. Helmets dented inward, greaves bent by lion jaws, the occasional gold-embroidered belt from a champion who got too cocky. Losers who fought well are given a quick hammer blow to the skull just to be sure, then loaded onto wagons for the mass graves outside the Esquiline Gate. Winners, who died anyway, get a slightly nicer funeral, but only slightly. Fame is temporary, compost is eternal. The quirky detail that still turns stomachs. They saved the blood professional blood collectors, yes, that was a job, scooped it into amphorae while it was still warm. Gladiator blood was sold as medicine, epilepsy cure, aphrodisiac, general richer people nonsense. Some entrepreneurs mixed it with wine and sold it back to the crowd the next day as vintage arena red. Rome invented the post-game merchandise table 2,000 years early, and it was grim as hell. You step back into the arena itself. The torches have moved on, leaving only moonlight and silence. The sand looks silver now, smooth and innocent, as if nothing happened. But if you stare long enough, you can still see the darker patches where the rakes missed a spot. The Colosseum breathes out, slow and heavy, like a beast that has eaten its fill and is settling down to sleep. Somewhere far below, a forgotten animal shifts in its cage and growls at a dream. Up in the attic, the valerian ropes creak in the night wind, sounding almost like rigging at sea. You walk the full circuit once, boots silent on the packed sand, passing beneath the empty imperial box where moonlight spills across purple cushions that will never be warm again tonight. Every arch you pass under feels like a different century watching you. The building doesn't sleep, it waits. Tomorrow the gates will open again, the sailors will climb their masts, the elevators will rise, and 50,000 voices will fill the air like nothing ever happened. But tonight, for a few brief hours, the Colosseum remembers every scream it ever swallowed. And if you stand very still in the centre of the arena, you can almost feel the sand shift under your feet, not from wind, not from rats, but from the slow, patient heartbeat of a place that has watched 2,000 years of men kill each other for applause and still hasn't blinked. You leave through the same gate the living used, the Porta Sana Vivaria, stepping over a discarded laurel wreath, someone dropped in the rush. Behind you, the great stone ellipse settles into darkness. Arches black against the stars, waiting for morning the way the sea waits for ships. Dawn is breaking, pale gold over the eastern arches. The Colosseum is already awake again. You can hear it before you see it. The low thunder of iron wheels on horse and stone. The bellow of oxen. The shouts of overseers who never sleep, waiting for morning the way the sea waits for ships. Dawn is breaking, pale gold over the eastern arches. The Colosseum is already awake again. You can hear it before you see it. The low thunder of iron wheels on horse and stone. the bellow of oxen, the shouts of overseers